Public Relations and Fund Development for the Windsor-Essex Children's Aid Society.
And I'm Tina Gatt, Manager of Community Outreach.
As we offer these podcasts, we are seeing a wide variety of guest speakers which are showcasing to us the many things that help support children, families, and youth that the Windsor-Essex Children's Aid Society provides services to. Today, we are very fortunate to have one of our community partners with us who will speak about youth diversion.
Welcome, Joanna Conrad, Executive Director of Youth Diversion. We're very happy to have you today. We know that you're doing so much important work in our community, and we can't wait to hear more about what Youth Diversion does. But before we go there, I know you through our work together in the community. You're a bundle of energy, and I know you're the driving force behind the success of Youth Diversion. So just want to get to know you a little bit better before we really get into what Youth Diversion is all about. So tell us where you grew up, and how did that affect who you've become?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. So my upbringing had a lot to do with, I would say, in terms of, the way in which I operate day to day, but also in terms of how the organization runs, because the organization is very much based on, my vision, right? And so to start, I guess, from the very beginning, I was born in Poland and I immigrated to Canada with my family when I was about 5 years old. And as a first generation immigrant, those lived experiences essentially made me who I am. When someone sees me, oftentimes, typically, they might imagine that, it's a stereotypical, blonde female, perhaps she's privileged, this, that, or the other. They don't necessarily understand that perhaps I have a different upbringing, that maybe I appreciate things differently than others might, or perhaps even just in terms of my vision or outlook on life is different, right? Even in terms of the way in which I think my personality is very much a result of my upbringing. I was essentially forced to be very independent at a very early age and do things for myself and work. I mean, my parents instilled a very strong work ethic in me, but also when it comes to just appreciating differences and values and understanding hardships too. So all of those things really provided a foundation for me in terms of who I ended up becoming as an adult. And it really shapes the way in which I go about my day-to-day sort of, life in terms of how I view people, how I view things that are going on in our world, but also in terms of, the families that we work with and understanding that perhaps not everybody is just what they appear to be.
Mm-hmm. So can you give some examples of the mistakes or failures that you experienced, and what did you learn from them? And what do you wish you would have known when you started out?
Well, I'd like to say I make mistakes on a regular basis. I think we all do, right?
We do.
When it comes to being a human, that's just part of life. But one of my biggest mistakes when I was a child, especially, well, not so much a child, I was a teenager, I was 16, I was arrested myself, and I was in the diversion program. I mean, in the Peel region, not here in Windsor, I always say, just in case anybody wants to look me up. But, when it comes to myself as a young person, I was oftentimes in conflict with, whether it was at school with principals or teachers. I liked to push boundaries. My parents divorced when I was 12, so I was growing up primarily with my mom, and she was working, and so I had a lot of free time, and it was just a lot of peer pressure. And when we look at peer pressure, especially today versus back then, I always say I'm so thankful that I'm not a teenager right now, because I know the things I was doing back then, and it was before social media, so I can only imagine what I would have done now. Thankfully so, but regardless, when I was arrested, I ended up going through a diversion program. And at the time, it didn't make a huge impact on me. I thought I was too cool, and I knew everything already. But in retrospect, it really did shape me who I am, especially as an adult. And even with respect to the way in which we look at the people that we work with, especially the young people that we work with as an organization. I keep that 16-year-old self very close to me. I like to go back to her on a regular basis to think, well, if we're going to provide this service, how would I have liked it? What would I have thought about this? And I understand, there's quite a number of years in between there and things have changed. However, at the same time, when it comes to young people and the way in which they look at life or what their needs are, I think that that's still very much the same. And so the services that we provide, I truly do look at, myself in those years and, what was I going through? What were the things that were impacting me in that moment? What did I need and who did I need it from? And how can youth diversion fill those gaps, right? And so that's really how I've learned from a major mistake, in the sense that I use it to my advantage today in terms of how the organization runs. But, when it comes to mistakes in general, I've made so many, and I oftentimes try to use those to learn from, especially when it comes to my career as well, right? I mean, when I first started out, I didn't necessarily understand how much that this job would essentially capture my entire life. I always said, when I went to school for law, and that was my undergrad. My goal was to be a lawyer. And while I was doing that at York University, I had a professor say to me, like, being a lawyer is not what it's cracked up to be. You have to start out and do all this work for free, pro bono, and then the hours are crazy. And if you ever want to make a partner, really, they deterred me from ever wanting to pursue it. And I was like, yeah, why would I want to do that? Like, I want a 9-to-5 job, be home with my family after. And I thought that, maybe there's something else out there for me. And I started changing my career path. And here we are so many years later, and I'm working 24/7, probably, for sure at a much different pay gap. And I'm thinking, how did I end up here? I should have just pursued the legal thing. Right. But anyway, I do love my job. I'm very passionate about what I do. And so, at the end of the day, there's pros and cons to everything, but I try to use every experience as an opportunity to learn from it and to make something better out of it.
Yeah. So speaking of work-life balance, you have a morning routine. How does that motivate you every day?
So I'm sure morning people or morning hater people will cringe and not appreciate this, but I do wake up about 4:30 every day, and I have for the majority of my adult life. I'm a big believer in routine and structure, but I'm also very much a type A person, so I like things
What time
just
do you go
so.
to bed?
Well, it depends on the day, but typically it's 9:30.
Okay.
I put my kids to bed and then I go to bed. I'm not definitely like a nightlife type of person. But I do, appreciate having my sleep and then waking up in the morning and getting things done. And mornings for me are my time. And, as a mother of 3 children and someone who works, I have technically 2 jobs. Like, I teach at the college as well, part-time. So, I'm busy and I have a lot going on. I volunteer in the community. And there really isn't very much time for my own sense of, self, right? In terms of who I am and what I want to do for me. So my mornings are my time to accomplish the things that are important to me. It's a great stress relief. When I wake up and I go to the gym, I like to sweat really hard and put in a good workout. And then it's just a sense of satisfaction for me, right? And there's so much that, especially now, research that speaks to the benefits of having a morning routine, which I didn't know about back in the day. But I definitely do appreciate it in the sense that, even by 9 o'clock, I feel like I've already accomplished so much. I put in a good workout, come home, had a good meal, taken my kids or made them breakfast, got them off to school. And then by the time I get to work, I'm feeling good. Like, I got things done and, I'm ready to tackle the day. So it's a sense of, taking care of myself so I can be my best self, whether it's at home or at work. But it's also an opportunity for me to feel like, this is great. Like, I feel like I've accomplished something. So even if my day at the very least is not the greatest day because things go bad, I still feel good about something that has happened.
And that self-care piece is
course.
so vital.
Yes.
And I'm sure that's going to come through in this conversation too about youth and how they find themselves in difficult spots and really not paying attention to self-care. So,
Right.
Yeah.
So Joanna, we're going to learn a lot about youth diversion. But first, in a nutshell, what is it? And what do people misunderstand about your organization the most?
So youth diversion's been in the community since 1980, which oftentimes shocks people. Prior to 2012, I would say 2012-ish, the majority of the clients that we worked with were primarily police and court referrals. So our reputation is essentially goes down in the sense that we work with quote unquote bad kids. And the misconception is that we only work with bad kids, and that essentially, if a young person comes through our door, it's because they're a young offender. And when it comes to the work that we do today, we've changed drastically as an organization. Over the last few years, we now service kids as young as 6, so essentially 6 and up, and we provide various programs and services that address a number of different issues that are going on in young people's lives. So the majority of the work that we do is truly preventative, in the sense that we try to equip young people with the information to make good choices. But it's definitely not just bad kids. And I hate when I hear bad kids, because to me, a bad kid or a bad behavior doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bad kid. And oftentimes there's more to it than them just being, they're not a bad person. Something is contributing to that behavior. So Youth Diversion's goal is to determine and to discover what is that's contributing to that behavior. And we try to address it in the best way possible. So, when it comes to the public, oftentimes we hear parents say, well, I'm worried if I refer my child that they're going to be interacting with criminals, and, what are they going to learn, and what are they going to do? And it's like, listen, at the end of the day, we all make mistakes, I always say, and whether your kid or the other kid has been involved with the police or not, it's just a matter of someone got caught and the other one didn't. Because, at the end of the day, the kids are engaging in so many behaviors that could be quote unquote criminal these days, where, who are we to place judgment, right? And nobody knows why they're referred there. Nobody knows who is who and why they're there. Essentially, they're all there for the same reason, is to learn some good things about what's going on and how they can utilize those skills to the best of their ability.
For sure.
So building on that, what would you say is the biggest challenge now that youth diversion faces, and how are you and your organization dealing with that?
So our biggest challenge is, today, and essentially is over the last couple of years, has been everything with respect to the social media and I say the internet of everything, right? We have a lot of issues with respect to, and it's multi-dimensional. So it's not just sexting, let's say, which seemed to be a big issue back in 2012. The reason why we initially developed our program, which is now called #KYPP, which stands for #Keep Your Privates Private, used to have a different name, which was called Respect and Message, one for boys, one for girls. But it's changed over the course of years, because when it first started out, Windsor Police actually contacted us and said, we have all these kids sexting, what are we supposed to do with it? Can you help us out? And so we developed a program to address that, but at the time it was a taboo subject and nobody wanted to talk about it. And the fact that we had this program, we actually got national attention for it, where I was doing interviews with people from British Columbia, because they were like, what is this program? I can't believe you're talking about this. And I was like, really? It's not that big of a deal. But today, nobody even cares about sexting anymore. I think because there's so many other issues. And so when we talk about what we're seeing as an organization is, it's the internet of everything is really what we're seeing. And that's our biggest issue, because of the impact and the multi-dimensional interventions that really have to take place in terms of the impact that it's had on young people from a very, very, very early age. When we're talking about the hypersexualization of society and the impact of that, pornography for that matter. And then just very recently, we've seen quite a bit of aggression in youth when it comes to physical assaults. We've seen quite an increase in the sense of youth-on-youth violence. And that to me is becoming a real concern when it comes to exploring, the reasons behind that. And then even in terms of the violence that's associated with it with respect to the level of aggression. Oftentimes it's a group on group, or it's a group on one person. Typically there's a recording of it that's also involved, and it's becoming quite a concern, absolutely.
And as a mother of an almost 15-year-old, the whole situation with iPhones and having access to them, I regret the day that I gave my daughter a phone. But at the same time, when she has her privileges removed, then I can't communicate with her. I can't
Right.
track her. So it's just such a double-edged sword. It can be used for so much, but at the end of the day, it can also be used in really negative ways. And so sort of as a, extension of what you just said, having those phones is a challenge. And I'm sure you're seeing that as well. And how do you address that with parents who, just don't know what to do with their kids?
Absolutely. So, as a mother of 3, I totally appreciate, when it comes to phones and devices and living in this world that we live in. It is digital. We're not getting away from that. There's no judgment when it comes to the work that we do with respect to how we view parents, for example, or parenting. As a parent myself, my kids have been on devices since, I don't even want to admit it, right? Essentially when they were toddlers, right? And there is that juxtaposition that we find ourselves in where, as parents, I think you want to keep them away from some of these dangers that perhaps, perceived or real dangers with respect to online usage. But at the same time, you want them to be able to talk to their friends about the things that their friends are talking about. And I know my son, for example, himself, the oldest one, he's like, my friends are talking about all these video games. I hate video games, by the way. And so I don't allow them in my home. And he's like, I don't even know what to talk to them about because, I don't allow it. And then, my husband and I are like, well, are we doing a disservice to our children because we don't allow the video games in the house? Or, so like, what do you do? Like, there's no book about it, right? Mm-hmm. And when we talk about devices and exposing our kids to them, I mean, at the end of the day, they're exposed regardless. Whether we want it or not, they're exposed, right? Mm-hmm. And it's whether it's tablets, whether it is iPads, whether it's phones. So that's inevitable. And it's just a matter of parents truly understanding, which I think parents are having a really difficult time wrapping their minds around, in the sense that, they think, oh, it's cute. My 2-year-old knows how to use an iPad better than I do. Well, is it cute? No. I mean, perhaps it's interesting or maybe impressive, but with that being said, it's definitely not safe, right? And so parents are missing the boat. And again, I mean, the only reason I can say that is because I see it. And perhaps if I wasn't immersed in this world that I am, wouldn't know myself, right? And so our goal when it comes to youth diversion is to help parents understand the impact that phones and just exposure to is having on kids. And that's really where we're lacking as parents, this generation of parents and future generations for that matter, in terms of, the self-esteem that our kids have, right? In terms of even like their sleep or lack of sleep, right? Their attention spans for that matter. I mean, you can speak to any teacher and they'll tell you they've seen what a difference, over the course of years that devices have had on children in terms of their attention span, right? But moreover than that, when it comes to the way in which they behave, right? The way in which they value themselves, they value one another, respecting themselves, respecting other people, even in terms of healthy relationships, right? There's quite a bit of chatter right now with respect to a poster that was at a local school. I'm sure you've heard about it with respect to dress code, right? In terms of how, the girls were wearing or were not wearing and so on and so forth. And, when we look at that, it's really easy for us to say, well, she shouldn't dress like that, or, well, let's just, solve the problem and do uniforms or whatever. Okay, great. But all of these are Band-Aid approaches, right? And at the end of the day, I think we're missing the boat when it comes to truly looking at what the source of the problem is, which is essentially the industry, right? Like we're talking about the industry. And when I say the industry, it's the porn industry. And I can get into that further. But essentially the porn industry and the hypersexualization of society has taken over, and it really has impacted the way in which kids and adults for that matter view themselves. When it comes to young females, especially from a very early age, they get the message that either they are invisible or, for lack of a better term, doable, right? In the sense that they are wanted, that they are desired, right? So you're either invisible or sexualized and sex kitten-y, right? And they go from toddler to sex kitten very quickly. And, when it comes to the way in which boys view girls and even themselves, again, all of this is impacted by that. So when we have situations like this that come about, especially with the poster in the school, I think we need to look at, well, why do these girls feel the need to wear these clothing or, these items of clothing, or why do they feel that this is necessary, or, where is their self-esteem at, or why do they feel that they need that validation from someone else, right? In terms of how they look. And I think we're missing the boat. And unfortunately, we forget what we thought when we were that age. We all had low self-esteem. We all wanted to fit in. We all wanted to be accepted and be cool, or, to be desired. Like, these are all very natural feelings that we have and that we had when we were teenagers. And yet we didn't have the pressures of the internet on a regular basis, and the filters, and the messaging that is continuously being given to us, where yes, you have to look sexy, you have to look desirable, look perfect, right, and have this certain lifestyle, and if you don't have it, you don't fit in, and you're the other, and you're not wanted, and you're going to be made fun of. And that's what we see on a regular basis. And it's tough. Like, it is tough. So when parents come, into youth diversion for whatever reason, oftentimes they're sitting like, I regret giving my kid a cell phone. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. But, what are we doing now to strengthen those kids, right? And what are we doing to strengthen the next generation? Because as parents, truly, we can't take those devices away. There's no going back, right? So we can't even look at it from a perspective of, okay, well, let's just not give them the phones and all of this is going to go away. Because the hypersexualization of our society is there, and the internet of everything is there regardless. So now, what do we do about it? As parents, as adults who work with young people, how are we going to strengthen them and make them resilient to these messages?
How to navigate around those issues.
Absolutely.
If we can come back to the issue of pornography, because again, that has been in existence for long time.
Yes.
As you say, the world, this internet, everything internet. How has pornography interrupted normal development of children, and how can we as parents help deal with this in a healthy manner with our kids?
So when it comes to pornography, and I have to be clear, when it comes to the research that is evident or speaks to the evidence with respect to the impact on it, there is a multitude of data that speaks to the impact that it has on young people and their brains. And when and oftentimes, people might look at me and be like, oh, she's like anti-porn, or, a prude or whatever, because, talking about pornography and its impact. And yet, again, when we're looking at the pornography that is present today, it is not the pornography that perhaps people are thinking was around back in the day. So, Dad's Playboy or whatever that maybe a kid got into when they were younger is not the pornography that children have access to today. And back when Hugh Hefner came around with the Playboy bunnies and whatever, research already started at that point when it comes to the impact that pornography was having on men and their sexual preferences. Not to mention the fact that the pornography that was back then is considered soft porn today, and it's actually not even considered soft porn. It's just pop culture, essentially. And the pornography that I'm talking about is very accessible. It is available to kids within seconds of them going on any platform, whether it's Instagram, whether it is Snapchat or Google for that matter. It takes seconds. And sometimes they don't even ask for it. They might just be on Discord, which is, a gaming app, in a chat, and it's sent to them without even any warning. As a 38-year-old female, I can say that when I downloaded Discord to see what it was all about, my 38-year-old eyes, like, I'm traumatized to this day based on what I saw just going on Discord. And, the difference is that, first of all, it is something that it's not regulated. So when it comes to pornography, it's not regulated whatsoever. It is extremely violent. It is hardcore. It explores degradation to an extreme of women. It is shaping views of
becomes so
young
normalized.
people. And the thing is, we're seeing it. Like, we are seeing it. And over the course of the years, we are seeing the impact of it on our youth more and more and more, to the point where we are truly seeing young people coming into our office and saying, well, I was just trying to imitate what I saw. And it's terrifying, because what they're seeing is not in any way, shape, or form what sex is about, or what intimacy is about, or what relationships are about. And our sex ed curriculum, for that matter, is just not up to par when it comes to educating young people. And what parents are oftentimes missing the boat on is that the first age of exposure for most children is between the ages of 8 and 11. So when we're talking about a child being 8 years old, and let's just say it's a male, they're traumatized. They are traumatized from the moment that they click on that image and they see the violence and the degradation. And, when they see that, they're terrified. However, the messaging that is being given to them from sites like Pornhub is, are you man enough to look further? Well, what little boy is going to say, I'm not man enough? I don't know any, 10-year-old that's saying, my 5-year-old would say, I'm man enough. You know what I'm saying? So they go further because they want to prove it to themselves that they can. And yet we know from science, from research, that the impact that this has on their brain is tremendous. So pornography and its impact on the brain is actually comparable to that of a cocaine hit. So the impact that cocaine might have, like the dopamine levels in your brain, is equivalent to that of pornography. So imagine an 8, 10, 11-year-old child having that dopamine hit. Would they not go back? Right. I can't stand outside of an elementary school with drugs or alcohol and say, hey, here, have some cigarettes, or have some, Coke, or have a shot of vodka. I can't do that. I would be arrested in a second. And yet Pornhub and various other porn sites are out there with no regulation, with absolutely no restrictions other than the kid going online. And a kid might be curious because, they are, when it comes to, like I said, the sex ed, it's not very, thorough, let alone discussing it in an age appropriate manner, and in a timely manner. So they might, think, oh, okay, I want to see a female body. And they might type in a word that they might want to see a female body. And that word is going to generate access to pornography, right? And so when we see the impact of that on their relationships, the issue is that the boys are being traumatized, they're internalizing it, and they're thinking, this is the way that women want to be treated. This is what a woman's essentially job is to please me. And unfortunately, the messaging is going through to the females as well, where the girls are thinking, this is what I have to do in order for him to like me. And I can't tell you the number of youth, the girls that we have had come through Youth Diversion, where when we say to them, why did you do that? What were you thinking? I just wanted him to like me. That's what they say. Now, it breaks my heart. Mm-hmm.
Joanna, sort of to turn the tables on that, because what you're telling us is, it's overwhelming. So much is out there.
Yes.
But, looking at what can we do? What is the proactive way of dealing with this? So in your words, what is the phrase, strengthen youth, strengthen their future? What does that mean?
So it's all about education, right? When Youth Diversion, when we started looking at what our mission truly was, it was essentially at the end of the day to strengthen young people from, internally outward, right? At the end of the day, we know as an organization, we can't fix kids. We're not going to fix somebody, right? Mm-hmm. As much as we might want to. And nor can we necessarily impact their life at home or other external factors that might be going on. However, if we are able to strengthen them by educating them, then hopefully their futures will be that much better, right? They're able to then change the way in which they go about things. They might become more resilient. So our program, the hashtag Keep Your Privates Private, focuses on pornography. We talk about the impact of this hypersexualized world on young people when it comes to their, self-esteem, their relationships, what consent means. Mm-hmm. Consent is just so far gone for so many kids. They have no understanding of what that means. And so we educate them, we talk about it, and we get down to the very nitty gritty about, starting at, first of all, why are you on there? What are you looking for? What is it that you need, right? Again, speaking about validation and all these types of things, right? But, when we're talking about pornography and what are we going to do about it, really, it's all about building resilience, right? parents have to understand that, because again, oftentimes parents will say, well, it's not my kid. My kid, isn't going to be exposed to that. Or my kid isn't going to be sending news. Or my kid would never, record themselves in a sexual act and then spread it across, wherever. Well, I hate to tell you, but yeah, it is your kid, because your kid is my kid is your kid, and so on and so forth. I mean, at the end of the day, no kid is safe, I would say, because at the end of the day, when we're talking about at-risk youth, especially, and oftentimes in our minds, we have this misconception as to what an at-risk youth is. We think stereotypically what that might look like. And in today's day and age, every kid is at risk. First of all, every kid is at risk of potentially becoming in contact with a predator online. I mean, that happens so easily. Every kid is at risk of their self-esteem being impacted by the filters and everything else that they're looking at. These picture-perfect people where they're constantly comparing themselves to, where, if you have stretch marks or cellulite or hair that's out of place, all of a sudden you're thinking something's wrong with me. Well, my body parts don't look like their body parts, right? And that has an impact on them. Not to mention, these cyberbullying that goes on. Not to mention, these unrealistic expectations in terms of lifestyles that they should live, where they start looking at themselves and thinking like, where am I going wrong? Why is this not my world, right? And, again, there's just a multitude of issues. It's like an onion. There's so many layers. And we know we can't escape this. So what do? We educate. We need to educate. And, at the end of the day, our goal as an organization is to provide information to young people, hopefully very early on. But, at whatever level that they come to us, we want to provide them with information to understand, okay, this is what's going on. It is out beyond you. Like, you don't even necessarily know how you've been impacted until we break it down. And then we provide them with strategies as to how to deal with it going forward. And for parents, I think it's important for them to start thinking about talking about important topics with their children at a very early age. And, am I suggesting that they talk about pornography with a 5-year-old? No, but we need to be talking about gender equity. What does that mean? What does it mean with respect to gender roles? And what does it mean when we're talking about consent and body parts and, touching and how we view men and women? When I was growing up, we never had a sex talk, it just didn't happen. And I still remember my parents throwing a book at me and being like, here, read this. And it was one of those books for kids about what sex is and what your body looks like or whatever. It was so awkward. And, parents dread that thought. Parents dread thinking that they have to talk about the birds and the bees. And we always say that, don't make it awkward.
It's not one conversation. It's a lifetime for sure.
It is. It's not one, 100-minute conversation. It's 100 one-minute conversations that you're having. And having in the car, you're driving by the billboard, you see a sexy woman on the billboard. Well, why is that woman wearing the bra on a billboard? Do we see men like that? Why do you think that is? Let's talk about your video games. How are men portrayed? How are women portrayed? Why do you think that is? Having these conversations and exploring the differences, but also exploring what consent looks like and just them, being aware of their own bodies and having these conversations with respect to, some of these outside forces. And I understand that some parents simply don't understand that this is even a conversation that they have to have. And part of our mission truly is changing in the sense that we realize that in order to strengthen youth, we also have to strengthen their parents, right? And
now saying that,
we've
if
missed
I
the
could
boat
just
there.
nab at that one, because we're running out of time, unfortunately. But what is one piece of advice that you would have for our listeners, briefly? I guess one piece of advice that we could close out with.
I would say do not use a child's phone or device as a form of punishment. When it comes to, us giving kids access to a device, what ends up happening is that to them is their lifeline to the world. They love having a phone and, access to whatever their friends or games or what have you. And as soon as you start using that as a source of, that carrot where you're dangling it in front of their face, like, if you're bad, I'm taking this away, right? They will never come to you and share with you when things go wrong. Right. So, when it comes to, and I know it's hard for parents to wrap their minds around this, but use something else as a consequence for poor behavior, right? When we're talking about the devices, don't use that, because when something goes wrong, they will be afraid to come talk to you about it. If they see something that they're uncomfortable with, if they engage in any type of behavior that is concerning to them, they're going to be afraid to come and tell their parents if they think that the parents are going to take it away. So they rather internalize it and try to deal with it on their own, which never goes good, right?
No.
So, my biggest piece of advice is for parents. First of all, do not use that as a punishment, because it never goes well. But in addition to that, educate yourself. Like, parents cannot, claim that they're oblivious to what the dangers of the digital age are, right? Like, at this point in time, when we signed up to be parents, we signed up to be responsible for these little people. And, at this point in time, yeah, I get it. Parenting is hard. I know. I have 3 of my own, and it's not easy. But we have to take it upon ourselves to learn about what is going on, what the digital world is doing when it comes to the impacts that it's having on their little lives, and what are we as parents going to do about it. So, talk, and talk some more.
That's great.
Yeah, and I think that is the key. My children are now older children, adults, but I think the key even back when was discussion and talking about things. And like you said, the different platforms that are out there now with social media, the threats of pornography, those types of things have all sort of escalated everything to a huge concern for all of us. But again, keeping an open mind, open discussion with your child, I think is the way to go. Tina, any closing thoughts, remarks?
No, I mean, even for me as a parent, I've learned so much, and it really is about the conversations and going the journey with your children. So thank you for some unbelievable information, and certainly reminders for me as a parent as well. So I know our listeners will really get a lot out of this presentation. So thank you so much.
Thank you.